Night fell quickly on the small moon. The damaged ship sat silent on the rocky ground, emergency lights glowing dimly in the darkness. Inside, the passengers gathered in the largest intact section. Many were cold, hungry, and afraid. Captain Subin stood before them, her uniform torn, but her voice steady. "The good news is that we've sent out a distress signal. Help will come." "And the bad news?" someone asked. "It will take at least 3 days for the nearest rescue ship to reach us," she replied honestly. "We need to survive until then." Worried whispers spread through the group. The moon was cold. Their food supplies were limited. Many species needed special conditions to survive. Dr. Han stepped forward. "We need to organize. Different species have different needs." "How do we do that?" a passenger asked. "None of us have survival training." "I do," a weak voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned. Daho stood there, leaning heavily against the wall. His skin was pale and burned in patches from radiation. The neural suppressor on his spine flickered weakly, but his eyes were clear and determined. "You should be resting." Dr. Han rushed to his side. Daho shook his head. "Later. Right now, you need help." Despite Dr. Han's protests, Daho moved slowly to the center of the room. The passengers made way for him, their expressions a mix of awe and concern. "On Earth," Daho began, his voice soft but carrying through the quiet room, "we learn to survive harsh conditions from childhood. This moon is tough, but we can manage." He motioned for Captain Subin to show him the ship's layout on a datapad. He studied it briefly, then looked up at the worried faces around him. "First, we need to check what supplies we have. Food, water, medical. Then we organize sleeping areas based on species needs. Some of you need warmer temperatures, others need more humidity." With quiet authority, Daho divided them into teams. Each team had a specific job: food inventory, water collection, shelter preparation. Despite their differences, the aliens worked together, following the humans' instructions without question. As the night grew colder, Daho taught them Earth survival techniques: how to conserve body heat by sitting close together, how to find water in unexpected places, how to create makeshift tools from broken ship parts. Jisoo stayed close to Daho, watching his every move with wide eyes. "Were you scared in the engine room?" she asked him when others weren't listening. Daho looked at her thoughtfully. "Yes," he admitted. "Being brave doesn't mean not feeling fear. It means doing what's right even when you're afraid." As midnight approached, most passengers had settled into their designated areas. The ship was cold, but they had used emergency blankets and shared body heat to stay warm. Daho checked each group, making sure everyone was as comfortable as possible. His own condition was worsening. Dr. Han followed him anxiously, trying to convince him to rest. "Just one more check," Daho insisted, his breathing labored. They reached the final group, where Raul was helping elderly passengers. The Thalassian looked up as Daho approached. "Everyone is settled here," Raul reported. Then his 4 eyes narrowed with concern. "You've given away your blanket." Daho shrugged. "The Volraxians need it more. Their crystalline bodies crack in cold temperatures." "But what about you?" Raul asked. "The radiation damage. You need to stay warm." "I'll be fine," Daho said. "Humans are adapted to temperature changes, another Death World trait." As he turned to leave, Daho stumbled. His legs finally gave out. Dr. Han and Raul caught him before he hit the floor. "No more," Dr. Han said firmly. "You've done enough. Now you rest." Daho didn't have the strength to argue. As they helped him to a quiet corner, he looked around at the passengers he had saved. Once strangers afraid of a Death Worlder, they now worked together, following his example of selflessness. The last thing Daho saw before his eyes closed was Jisoo bringing her family's blanket to cover him. Behind her, other aliens did the same, each contributing what they could to help the human who had sacrificed so much for them. In the cold night of an unknown moon, something important had changed. Not just survival tactics, but hearts and minds. Private Dae-ho Kim stepped onto the transport ship with slow, careful movements. His body hurt with each step. 3 days of non-stop fighting on the moon of Caraxes had left him drained. The wound in his side, though sealed by the medics, still burned like fire. The ship was crowded. Beings from across the galaxy packed the main cabin. Some had tentacles, others had scales. A few glowed with inner light. All of them moved aside as Dae-ho walked past, not out of respect, but out of fear. "Deathworlder," one whispered. The word followed him like a shadow. Dae-ho ignored them. He was used to it by now. Humans came from Earth, classified as Deathworld X-779 in official Galactic Federation records, a planet with high gravity, extreme weather, and dangerous wildlife, a planet that created tough, resilient beings like him. But today, Dae-ho didn't feel tough. He felt broken. At the front of the cabin, he spotted an empty seat in the priority section. The blue sign above it showed symbols for injured passengers, elderly beings, and those with special needs. Dae-ho touched the medical patch on his side. The doctor had ordered him to avoid standing for long periods. "Excuse me," he said to the transport attendant, a tall Thalasian named Roll. "May I sit there? I was injured in." "Priority seating is not for humans," Roll interrupted. His exoskeleton clicked as he moved to block Dae-ho's path. "Those seats are reserved for vulnerable species." Dae-ho blinked. "I understand, but I'm injured," my doctor said. "You're a Deathworlder," Roll said, voice cold. His 4 eyes narrowed. "Your kind can survive things that would kill most passengers on this ship. You can stand." A few passengers nearby nodded. A Volraxian with delicate crystal skin whispered to her companion, "They always want special treatment. My cousin says humans can survive having limbs cut off and still fight. I heard they can drink poison for fun," another added. Dae-ho closed his eyes briefly. He could argue. He could show them his military ID or the medical report listing his injuries. He could explain that being from a death world didn't make him invincible. But he was too tired. 3 years in galactic space had taught him that some minds wouldn't change. "I understand," he said simply. The ship lurched as it prepared for takeoff. Dae-ho grabbed a handrail, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. He found a spot near the wall where he could lean slightly. An announcement came over the speakers. "Attention all passengers. This transport will make the journey from Caraxes Station to the Galactic Hub in approximately 12 hours. Please secure all belongings and prepare for FTL travel." 12 hours of standing. Dae-ho took a deep breath. A small alien child with blue skin looked up at him from a nearby seat. The child's mother pulled her closer, whispering warnings. The child kept staring. "Are you really from a death world?" the child asked. Before Dae-ho could answer, the mother hushed the child. "Don't talk to it. Jishu. Deathworlders are dangerous." Dae-ho looked away. Through the viewport, he could see the stars beginning to stretch as the FTL drive engaged. He thought of Earth, so far away. He thought of the battles he'd fought for the Galactic Federation, battles that had saved countless lives, including species that now feared him. The ship hummed as it accelerated. Dae-ho tightened his grip on the handrail. His service medal, hidden under his civilian clothes, pressed against his chest. 12 hours to go. He could handle it. He was, after all, a Deathworlder. The lights dimmed as the ship entered FTL speed. In the semi-darkness, nobody noticed the small trickle of red blood beginning to seep through Dae-ho's shirt, or the paleness spreading across his face. Nobody noticed the hero in their midst, denied a simple kindness. The ship groaned like a wounded animal. Dae-ho moved quickly despite his injuries. He handed oxygen masks to those struggling to breathe. He helped secure passengers in their seats. Each movement sent waves of pain through his body. But he didn't stop. 2 minutes until impact, the captain's voice announced. Daho reached the small blue child, Jishu, and her mother. The mother no longer pulled her child away in fear. Instead, she looked at Daho with wide, grateful eyes. "Thank you," she whispered as he helped secure their safety harnesses. Daho nodded and moved on. He found Roll trying to stand, the Thalassian's exoskeleton now cracked in several places. "You need to sit," Daho told him, guiding the attendant to an empty seat. "How are you still moving?" Roll asked, his voice filled with wonder and confusion. "The gravity, it should be crushing you too." Earth's gravity is 1.5 times the Federation standard, Daho explained simply. "We're used to it." As Daho turned to help another passenger, his torn shirt caught on a broken panel. The fabric ripped further, exposing his back and side. Several aliens gasped. Daho's body was a map of scars. Some were surgical, precise, and clean. Others were jagged and brutal. But most shocking was the medical device embedded along his spine, a neural pain suppressor, glowing faintly blue under his skin. A tall alien in the medical section stood up with difficulty. His uniform identified him as Dr. Han, a Federation medical officer. "By the stars," Dr. Han said, staring at the device. "You're from the Ghost Division." The words spread through the cabin like wildfire. "Ghost Division. The human is Ghost Division." Daho didn't respond. He continued securing passengers, checking emergency systems, and distributing supplies. Dr. Han spoke louder, making sure everyone could hear. The Ghost Division was the Special Forces team that held the line at the Kryvax invasion 3 weeks ago. They fought for 52 hours straight without reinforcements. They saved the entire outer rim. The passengers fell silent, watching Daho with new eyes. "That neural suppressor," Dr. Han continued, pointing to the device in Daho's back, is only given to soldiers with injuries too severe for regular treatment. It blocks pain signals to allow them to function. But Dr. Han paused, his voice dropping. "But it shortens their lifespan significantly. It's a last resort." Daho finally stopped moving. He turned to face them all, his expression calm despite the alarms blaring around them. "That's why I asked for a seat," he said quietly. "Standing for long periods damages the suppressor's connection points." Roll's 4 eyes blinked rapidly in what his species recognized as shame. I thought you were just being entitled. That humans always want special treatment." Daho shook his head. "We just want to be treated as people, not as monsters from a death world." The ship lurched again, more violently this time. The lights flickered and died, leaving only the red emergency strips glowing along the floor. 1 minute until impact, the captain announced. "All passengers in crashed positions." Daho grabbed the comm system on the wall. "Captain, this is Private Daho Kim, Earth Defense Force, Ghost Division. Request permission to assist in the command center." There was a moment of silence before the captain's voice returned, surprised. "Ghost Division. Yes, permission granted. We need all the help we can get." Before Daho could move toward the command center, Jisoo's mother stood shakily. She pointed to her seat. "Please," she said, "take my seat." One by one, other passengers offered their seats as well. Roll stood despite his injuries. "You earned it," the Thalassian said. "More than earned it." Daho looked at the seats being offered, touched by the gesture. But instead of sitting, he straightened his back, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his wounds. "Thank you," he said. "But right now, I need to help save this ship. That's why I joined the Federation forces. Not because I'm a Deathworlder, but because I'm human. And humans protect those who need protection." With those words, he turned and pushed his way toward the command center, leaving behind a cabin full of aliens whose understanding of humans had just been forever changed. Daho made his way to the engine room. Warning signs flashed red on every door he passed. The radiation levels grew higher with each step. His skin began to tingle, then burn. Still, he moved forward. The final door to the engine room was sealed with emergency locks. A bright screen flashed. Danger. Lethal radiation levels. Do not. Daho used his military override code to unlock it. The door slid open with a hiss, releasing a wave of heat and the sharp smell of burning metal. He stepped inside. The engine room glowed with an eerie blue light. The main reactor core pulsed dangerously. Alarms blared from every panel. Daho's skin immediately felt like it was on fire, but he ignored it. He had a job to do. His comm unit crackled to life. Private Kim, this is Captain Subin. Can you hear me? Yes, Captain, Daho replied, moving toward the main control panel. I'm in the engine room. The radiation levels are. Her voice broke. We're monitoring your vitals through your neural suppressor. It's too high. I know, Daho said calmly. Just tell me what to do to fix this. There was a moment of silence. Then Captain Subin's voice returned, professional despite her emotion. You need to manually release the emergency coolant and reset the core containment field. As she gave him instructions, Daho worked quickly. His hands were steady even as his body began to fail. The radiation was affecting him faster than expected. His vision blurred at the edges. Blood began to drip from his nose. How's the evacuation going? He asked, trying to keep his mind focused as he worked. Good, Captain Subin replied. Dr. Han and the Thalasian attendant have moved everyone to Section 1. They're safe for now. Daho smiled through the pain. The Thalasian's name is Raul. He's a good person, just had wrong ideas about humans. As Daho worked on the cooling system, Captain Subin kept talking to him. Perhaps she knew it helped him stay conscious. Why did you join the Ghost Division? She asked. It's the most dangerous assignment in the Federation. Daho paused for a moment, his hands hovering over the controls. When Earth first joined the Federation, many aliens were afraid of us. They called us violent, dangerous, just because we came from a death world. He continued working as he spoke. I wanted to show that humans are more than that. That our strength doesn't make us dangerous. It makes us good protectors. The coolant system finally responded. Blue liquid began to flow through the tubes around the reactor. The alarms changed their tone, becoming less urgent. It's working, Captain Subin said, relief in her voice. The core temperature is dropping. Daho nodded, though no one could see him. He took a step toward the next panel he needed to reach, and his legs gave out. He fell to his knees, coughing up blood. Private Kim. Daho. Captain Subin called out, alarm in her voice. I'm still here, he managed to say, just taking a quick break. Using the wall for support, he pulled himself back to his feet. The neural suppressor on his spine was glowing bright red now, working beyond its limits. The containment field controls are on the far panel, Captain Subin instructed. Can you reach them? Daho took a deep breath. Yes. Each step was agony. The radiation was breaking down his body from the inside. But humans were stubborn. Earth had taught them that long ago. Never give up. Never surrender, especially when others depend on you. He reached the panel and entered the reset codes with shaking hands. The reactor's dangerous pulsing slowed, then stabilized. Containment field restored, the computer announced. Engine cooling system operational. Back in the command center, Junho shouted in triumph. He did it. We can make a safe landing now. Captain Subin leaned toward the comm. Daho, you can leave the engine room now. Get to Section 1 for medical treatment. There was no response. Daho. Private Kim. Can you hear me? All they could hear through the comm was the sound of labored breathing. Then, Daho's weak voice came through. Did I make a difference? Captain Subin fought back tears. Yes, you saved everyone on this ship. Good, Daho whispered. That's what humans do. The ship shook violently as it entered the final descent. Captain Subin's voice came over the announcement system. All passengers, prepare for emergency landing. Impact in 60 seconds. In Section 1, the passengers huddled together. Species that normally avoided each other now sat side by side, united by their shared danger. Dr. Han moved among them, offering what medical help he could with limited supplies. Will we survive the landing? Ji-Soo asked her mother, her small blue hands trembling. Before her mother could answer, Roll spoke up. Yes, little one. Thanks to the human. A strange silence fell over the group. The human they had shunned, the death worlder they had feared, was now their only hope. What happens to humans in radiation? A Volraxian asked Dr. Han quietly. Dr. Han's face grew somber. It destroys their bodies from the inside. It's very painful, even with a neural suppressor. And he went in there anyway. Knowing that, another passenger asked. Dr. Han nodded. That's what makes the Ghost Division special. They do what must be done, no matter the personal cost. The ship lurched again, throwing several passengers against the walls. The landing thrusters fired, slowing their descent in the final moments. In the command center, Captain Su-bin and Jun-ho fought to control their landing. The view screen showed a barren, rocky landscape rushing up to meet them. Emergency teams, stand by for crash landing. Captain Su-bin ordered through her comm. And send a medical team to the engine room immediately after we land. Do you think he's still alive? Jun-ho asked quietly. Captain Su-bin's hands tightened on the controls. If anyone could survive that much radiation, it would be a human. The ship hit the moon's surface with a tremendous impact. Metal screamed as it tore. Everyone was thrown forward, then back. Emergency foam deployed throughout the ship, cushioning the worst of the impact. Then, finally, stillness. For a moment, no one moved. Then Captain Su-bin's voice came over the system. We've landed. Damage reports coming in. Stay in your seats until emergency crews arrive. In Section 1, the passengers slowly recovered from the impact. Despite the rough landing, no one was seriously hurt. Dr. Han checked each person quickly, then turned to Roll. I need to get to the engine room, he said urgently. Private Kim needs medical attention immediately. Roll nodded. I'll come with you. Together, they made their way through the damaged ship. Parts of the corridor were blocked by fallen debris. They had to climb over broken panels and crawl under collapsed beams. When they finally reached the engine room door, it was sealed shut. Warning lights still flash, showing dangerous radiation levels inside. We need protective suits, Dr. Han said, looking around desperately. There's an emergency kit here, Roll said, pulling open a wall panel. Inside were 2 radiation suits. They quickly put them on and overrode the door lock. The scene inside made both of them stop in shock. The engine room was in ruins. Equipment had torn free from walls. Sparks flew from damaged panels. And in the center of the room, lying perfectly still on the floor, was Daho. They rushed to him. Dr. Han checked his vital signs, while Roll carefully lifted debris off the human's body. Is he? Roll couldn't finish the question. Dr. Han looked up, his expression a mix of disbelief and hope. He's alive. Barely, but alive. Humans are. I've never seen anything like this. His cells are actually fighting the radiation damage. As they prepared to move Daho, his eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy with pain, but still alert. Did everyone make it? He whispered. Yes, Roll said, his voice thick with emotion. Everyone survived. Because of you. Daho's lips curved into a small smile. Good. Why? Roll couldn't help asking. Why would you do this for us, after how we treated you? Daho's voice was barely audible. On Earth, we have a saying. The strong protect the weak. Not because we have to, because it's right. Dr. Han prepared a medical injector. Save your strength. We're going to get you out of here. There's something else, Daho said, his eyes focusing on Roll. On Earth, forgiveness isn't earned. It's given. That's what makes us human." With those words, he slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving Roll and Dr. Han to stare at each other in silent wonder at the true nature of Deathworlders they had so badly misunderstood. Daeho made his way to the command center. Each step was harder than the last. The ship shook violently around him. Twice he had to stop and hold onto the wall to keep from falling. The neural suppressor in his back glowed brighter now. It was working overtime to block the pain signals from his brain. Dr. Han had been right. Using it too much would shorten his life. But right now, lives were at stake. His pain didn't matter. He reached the command center and found chaos. 3 crew members lay unconscious on the floor. The captain, a woman named Subin, worked frantically at the controls. Another crew member, a man named Junho, tried to fix a smoking panel. Private Kim reporting, Daeho said, standing tall despite his pain. Captain Subin looked up, relief washing over her face. "Thank the stars. We're losing control of the ship. The main engines are dead, and the backup power is failing. Impact in 30 seconds, the computer announced." Daeho quickly assessed the situation. He had trained for emergency landings during his time with the Ghost Division. "We need to redirect all power to the front shields and the landing thrusters," he said, moving to an empty control station. His fingers flew over the controls with practiced ease. "That won't be enough," Junho said, his voice tight with fear. "We're coming in too fast." "Earth ships are designed to crash," Daeho said calmly. "I'm guessing this one isn't." Captain Subin shook her head. "Federation ships are built for smooth space travel, not for this." "Then we need to be creative," Daeho said. He pulled up a map of the area they were heading toward. "There. That moon. It has an atmosphere. If we can adjust our trajectory, we might be able to use it to slow us down before landing." Junho looked skeptical. "The heat from entry could tear us apart." "Not if we enter at the right angle," Daeho explained. "Earth ships do it all the time." Captain Subin studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Do it." Daeho's hands moved quickly over the controls, redirecting their path toward the small moon. The ship groaned in protest as he fired the remaining thrusters. Meanwhile, back in the passenger cabin, Dr. Han had organized the passengers into safer positions. He explained to them what the Ghost Division really was. "They're the best soldiers in the Federation," he told the wide-eyed aliens. "They take on missions no one else would survive. The battles they've won, they've saved countless lives." "But they're just humans," one passenger said, confused. "From a death world." Dr. Han nodded. "That's exactly why they can do what they do. Humans evolved on a planet that tried to kill them every day. High gravity, extreme temperatures, natural disasters, dangerous predators. They adapted to survive it all." Roll, the Thalassian attendant who had denied Daeho a seat, listened with growing shame. "Is that why he has that device in his back?" Jisoo asked, her small blue face serious. Dr. Han's expression grew sad. "The Ghost Division soldiers fight until they can't stand anymore. That neural suppressor lets him keep going even when his body is badly damaged. But it has a cost. It's burning through his life energy." A hushed silence fell over the cabin as the truth sank in. The human they had treated as an unwelcome Deathworlder was slowly dying to protect people who feared him. Back in the command center, Daeho had managed to adjust their course. The ship was now heading toward the moon at a shallow angle. "Braced for atmospheric entry," he announced over the ship's comm system. "This will be rough, but we can make it." The ship began to shake and heat up as it hit the moon's atmosphere. Warning lights flashed across every control panel. The hull temperature rose rapidly. Captain Subin looked at Daeho with new respect. "Where did you learn to fly like this?" Daeho gave her a small smile, even as sweat dripped down his face from the effort and pain. "On Earth, when we're children, we practice by falling out of trees and rolling down hills," he said. "This is just a bigger version of that." The ship glowed red-hot as it tore through the atmosphere, slowing with each passing second. They weren't out of danger yet, but they had a chance now. A chance that existed only because a Deathworld soldier had been on board. 2 hours into the journey, Daho's legs felt like stone. The wound in his side burned worse now. He tried to shift his weight without drawing attention. The Thalasian attendant, Roll, kept watching him with all 4 eyes, as if waiting for him to cause trouble. Daho focused on his breathing. In and out, slow and steady. It was a trick he had learned in basic training, back when Earth first joined the Galactic Federation. The ship hummed smoothly as it traveled through the stars. Most passengers had settled down. Some slept. Others watched entertainment on small screens. No one spoke to the humans standing by the wall. Then everything changed in an instant. A loud bang shook the entire ship. The lights flickered. Daho's soldier instincts kicked in immediately. He widened his stance and gripped the handrail tighter. "Attention all passengers." The captain's voice came through the speakers, strained and urgent. "We are experiencing technical difficulties. Please remain calm and..." Another bang cut off the message. This time, the ship lurched sideways. The artificial gravity wavered. Several passengers floated up from their seats before crashing back down. "We're being pulled into the gravitational field of the gas giant Nexer 7, the captain continued. "Our main engines have failed. Prepare for increased turbulence." Panic erupted in the cabin. Aliens of all species began crying out in their native languages. Some tried to reach the emergency supplies, but the increasing gravitational pressure made movement difficult. Daho saw the problem immediately. Most species in the Federation evolved on low-gravity worlds. As the ship was pulled toward the gas giant, the increasing forces were crushing them. The Volrexian with crystal skin cracked along her arm as she tried to move. A group of tentacled Moribs were flattened against their seats, their breathing labored. Even Roll, the Thalasian attendant, struggled to stay upright as his exoskeleton creaked under the pressure. For Daho, the increased gravity was uncomfortable but manageable. Earth's gravity was stronger than most Federation worlds. Humans were built to handle it. The ship shuddered violently. Emergency lights flashed red. The cabin pressure changed, making ears pop and breathing harder. "Hull breach in Section 4, announced the emergency system. "Oxygen levels decreasing." Emergency protocols activated. Daho watched as Roll tried to reach the emergency oxygen masks. The Thalasian's legs buckled under the pressure. A crack appeared in his exoskeleton. Without hesitation, Daho pushed away from his spot on the wall. Each step felt like walking through deep mud as the gravity increased. His wound screamed in protest, but he kept moving. He reached Rule just as the attendant collapsed. "Stay still," Daho told him. "I'll get the masks." Roll's 4 eyes widened in surprise. "Why? Why help me? I denied you." "That doesn't matter now," Daho said. He stretched up to the emergency panel, fighting against the crushing gravity. As he pulled down the first oxygen mask, a support beam broke loose from the ceiling. It fell directly toward a small blue child. Ji-Su, the one who had asked if he was from a death world. Daho didn't think. He lunged forward, pushing through the heavy gravity. He reached Ji-Su just in time, covering her small body with his own. The beam struck Daho's already injured shoulder with a sickening crack. Pain exploded through his body, but he didn't make a sound. Ji-Su was safe beneath him, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. Around them, the aliens watched in stunned silence as the human, the death worlder they had shunned, moved through conditions that had left them helpless. "The ship's stabilizers are failing," the captain announced. "Brace for impact in 3 minutes." Daho rose to his feet, the broken beam sliding off his back. Blood soaked his shirt now, visible to all. But his eyes were clear and focused. "I need volunteers who can still move," he said, his voice steady despite the pain. "We need to prepare for crash landing." The truth was becoming clear to everyone watching. They had denied a seat to the only person on board who could save them now. 3 days passed on the cold moon. The passengers worked together to survive, following the systems Daho had put in place. They shared food, conserved water, and protected each other from a harsh environment. Daho spent most of this time unconscious. The radiation damage was severe. Dr. Han worked tirelessly to keep him alive, using what little medical supplies they had. Each night, the passengers would gather around Daho, telling stories about their homeworlds, hoping he could hear them. On the morning of the fourth day, they spotted a ship in the sky. Rescue had arrived. Federation medical teams rushed into the crashed ship. They were surprised by what they found. Instead of panic and chaos, they discovered organized groups of different species working together smoothly. The passengers were thin and tired, but alive and in good spirits. "How did you manage this?" the rescue leader asked Captain Subin. She smiled and pointed to the corner where medical staff surrounded Daho. "We had help from a Deathworlder." The rescue operations moved quickly. The most vulnerable passengers were taken to the medical ship first. Dr. Han insisted that Daho be moved immediately to advanced medical care. As they carried Daho's stretcher toward the rescue ship, something unexpected happened. The passengers lined up along the path. As Daho passed, each one bowed in their species' gesture of respect. Rull stepped forward as they reached the exit. "Wait," he said to the medical team. Then he turned to face all the passengers. "Before we leave this place, I want to speak," the Thalasian said, his voice carrying across the quiet crowd. 3 days ago, I denied this human a seat because he was from a death world. I thought that made him dangerous and undeserving." Rull's exoskeleton clicked as he shifted uncomfortably. "I was wrong. We were all wrong about humans. Their strength isn't what makes them dangerous. It's what makes them the greatest protectors in the galaxy." Murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. Jisoo pushed forward to stand beside Rull. "He taught me what being brave means," the small blue child said clearly. "It means doing what's right even when you're afraid." One by one, others shared what they had learned from Daho. How to survive, how to help others, how to be strong not for yourself, but for those who need protection. On the stretcher, Daho's eyes flickered open. He looked around at the faces of those he had saved. A weak smile crossed his lips. 6 weeks later, Daho woke up in a Federation hospital on the Central Hub world. His room was filled with flowers, cards, and gifts from across the galaxy. Dr. Han stood by his bed, checking his vital signs. "Welcome back," Dr. Han said with a smile. "You've been asleep for quite a while." Daho tried to sit up. His body felt strangely light. "The neural suppressor. We removed it," Dr. Han explained. "Your injuries were severe, but not beyond repair. You won't need the suppressor anymore." Before Daho could respond, the door opened. Captain Subin entered, followed by Rull, Jisoo, and her mother. Behind them came a stream of familiar faces, the passengers from the ship. "What's happening?" Daho asked, confused by the crowd. Captain Subin stepped forward, her uniform now crisp and decorated with new medals. "The Federation Council is here to see you." The crowd parted to reveal a group of official-looking aliens in formal robes. The head counselor, a tall being with silvery skin, approached Daho's bed. "Private Daho Kim," the counselor said formally, "on behalf of the Galactic Federation, I present you with the Order of Galactic Unity, our highest honor." The counselor placed a glowing medal beside Daho's bed. "But more importantly, I bring news. The Federation Council has officially changed the classification of Earth from Death World X-779 to Protected Homeworld of a Guardian Species." Murmurs of approval filled the room. Rull stepped forward, his exoskeleton now repaired and polished. "The moon where we crashed has been renamed Kim's Landing," the Thalasian said proudly. "And all transportation systems now have priority seating reserved for humans, especially those in military service." Jisoo pushed past the adults to stand beside Daho. "I'm going to be like you when I grow up," she said solemnly. "I'm going to protect people." Daho looked around at the faces of those who had once feared him, now looking at him with respect and friendship. His journey had changed more than just his own life. It had changed how an entire galaxy viewed humans. He smiled at Jisoo. "That," he said quietly, "is the greatest honor of all." The ship screamed through the moon's atmosphere. Metal groaned. Heat warnings flashed red on every screen. But they were slowing down. "Hull temperature critical," the computer announced. "Oxygen system failing in sections 2 through 5. Captain Subin looked at the damage reports with growing alarm. "The passenger cabin is losing oxygen fast." Daho's face hardened. He knew what that meant. Without oxygen, most of the alien species on board would die within minutes. Humans could last a bit longer, but not much. "I need to go back," he said, already moving toward the door. "We need you here," Junho protested. Daho shook his head. "You can handle the landing now. The path is set. But those people need help." Before anyone could argue, he was gone, racing back through the shaking corridors toward the passenger cabin. His body protested with each step, but the neural suppressor kept him moving. When he reached the cabin, he found a scene of growing panic. The oxygen masks had deployed, but there weren't enough for everyone. Some passengers were already gasping for breath. Dr. Han struggled to help the most vulnerable aliens. He looked up as Daho entered. "The oxygen system is failing. We only have about 10 minutes of air left." Daho quickly assessed the situation. "We need to get everyone to Section 1. It still has working oxygen." "Many can't move in this gravity," Dr. Han said. Daho nodded. "Then we'll move them." He turned to the passengers who could still stand. "I need volunteers to help carry those who can't walk." To his surprise, several aliens stepped forward immediately, including Rull. The Felician's exoskeleton was cracked, but determination shone in all 4 of his eyes. "We'll help," Rull said. "Just tell us what to do." Daho organized them quickly into teams. Soon, they were moving the weakest passengers toward Section 1. Daho carried 2 small aliens himself, ignoring the warnings flashing on his neural suppressor. As they worked, the ship lurched again. A loud bang echoed through the hull, followed by a new alarm. "Emergency. Cooling system failure in engine room," the computer announced. "Critical overload imminent. Radiation leak detected." Junho's voice came over the comm system, tense and worried. "Someone needs to manually override the engine room cooling system, or we'll have a meltdown before we land." "But the radiation levels..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone knew what high radiation meant. Dr. Han looked at Daho, his expression grim. "The radiation would kill most Federation species within seconds." "How long would a human last?" Rull asked quietly. Dr. Han hesitated. "Maybe 5 minutes. 10 at most. But it would be painful. Even with a neural suppressor." All eyes turned to Daho. He stood still for a moment, then handed the small aliens he was carrying to another volunteer. "Get everyone to Section 1, he said calmly. "I'll handle the engine room." Dr. Han grabbed his arm. "You don't have to do this. We can wait for emergency services." "We'll never make a safe landing with an overheating engine," Daho replied. "And emergency services won't reach us in time." Jisoo, the small blue child, broke away from her mother and ran to Daho. She looked up at him with big, sad eyes. "Will you die?" she asked directly, in the way only children can. Daho knelt down to her level, despite the pain it caused him. "Everyone dies someday, little one. What matters is how we live." He stood up and addressed the room. "On Earth, we have a saying. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. It's not just words to us, it's how we live." Rull stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "You were right. We treated you badly because you're from a death world. We thought it made you dangerous. But it's what made you a hero." Daho shook his head. "Being from Earth doesn't make me a hero. What makes anyone a hero is being willing to help others, no matter where they're from. With those words, he turned and headed toward the engine room. Behind him, aliens who had once feared him now watched with respect, awe, and deep sadness as the Deathworld soldier prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice.